My aunt stood in my living room and declared, "This house should be mine, hand over the keys." When I refused, she laughed, "You'll be out soon enough. I called the bank and told them you stole the mortgage money." I pulled out my deed and smiled, "Really? Then explain why the house is fully paid off, in my name only." Aunt Margaret stood in my living room, her eyes scanning every corner with a mix of envy and determination. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floors, highlighting the tension that filled the space between us. "This house should be mine," she declared, her voice steady but edged with resentment. "Hand over the keys." I felt a surge of disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she replied, a smug smile creeping onto her face. "You'll be out soon enough. I called the bank and told them you stole the mortgage money." A slow grin spread across my face as I reached into the drawer of the coffee table, pulling out a crisp document. "Really? Then explain why the house is fully paid off, in my name only." Her face paled, the confidence draining from her features. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, let's rewind a bit. Growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, family gatherings were a blend of sweet tea, laughter, and the occasional undercurrent of tension. Aunt Margaret was my mother's younger sister, always the life of the party, but with a penchant for stirring the pot. She had a history of making poor financial decisions and expecting others to bail her out. My parents often fell victim to her manipulations, lending her money that was never repaid. When my parents passed away unexpectedly in a car accident, I inherited their estate, including the family home, a charming colonial with white pillars and a wraparound porch that had been in our family for generations. It was more than just a house. It was a repository of memories, laughter, and love. Aunt Margaret, however, saw it differently. She viewed the house as a missed opportunity, a property that should have been hers. She believed that as the last surviving elder in the family, she had a rightful claim to it. It started subtly. She'd drop hints during phone calls. "That house is too big for just you, don't you think?" she'd say. Or, "I've always loved that place. It holds so many memories for me." I brushed off her comments, attributing them to nostalgia. But then, she began showing up unannounced, giving unsolicited advice on how I should manage the property. "You know," she said one afternoon, sipping on sweet tea in the parlor, "this house would be perfect for hosting my book club. They'd absolutely adore it." "I'm sure they would," I replied, forcing a smile. "But it's my home, Aunt Margaret." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing more. Things escalated when I decided to renovate the house. I wanted to preserve its historical charm while adding some modern touches. Contractors came and went, and the house was a flurry of activity. Aunt Margaret's visits became more frequent, and her comments more pointed. "Why are you wasting money on these renovations?" she snapped one day. "If you can't afford the upkeep, maybe it's time to let someone else take over." "I'm perfectly capable of managing," I responded, my patience wearing thin. But the final straw came when I received a call from my bank. "Ms. Davis," the bank representative began, "we've received a report that the funds used to pay off your mortgage were obtained fraudulently." I was baffled. "Excuse me? That's impossible. An anonymous source reported that you embezzled money to pay off your home. We have to investigate." I knew immediately who was behind this. Aunt Margaret had gone too far. Which brings us back to that fateful day in my living room. After presenting her with the deed, her face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," she hissed, storming out. But it was over. I filed a restraining order against her and changed the locks. The bank concluded their investigation, clearing me of any wrongdoing. The experience taught me a valuable lesson about boundaries and the lengths some people will go to out of greed. Family ties are strong, but they don't give anyone the right to trample over your life. And as for Aunt Margaret? She moved to Florida, where, last I heard, she was trying to stake a claim on another relative's condo. Some things never change. A week after Margaret stormed out, things went quiet. Too quiet. I thought maybe she'd accepted defeat, moved on to her next scheme, or finally realized she couldn't win this time. Then the letters started coming. Not handwritten ones. Legal ones. Official-looking envelopes delivered by certified mail. The first was from a local attorney I didn't know. The letter claimed there was a dispute over rightful ownership of the property and requested my cooperation in settling the matter amicably. I laughed out loud at that part. I called the attorney listed, calm at first. "Your client doesn't have a legal leg to stand on," I said. "I'm just doing my job," he replied. "But if you have the deed and proof of payment, this shouldn't be a problem." I sent the documents over. I thought that would be the end of it. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. This time from family court. Margaret had filed for emergency conservatorship. She claimed I was mentally unfit, unable to manage the house or my finances, and that she needed control to protect the family estate. I was stunned. I'm 36. I have a full-time job in IT, my bills are always paid, and I've never had even a parking ticket. But there it was in black and white. She was trying to take legal control of my life. I hired a lawyer. It cost me nearly $5,000 just to get the emergency order dismissed. But Margaret wasn't done. She started telling neighbors I was a drug addict. She said I'd lost my job. That the renovations were part of some wild manic episode. I got cold stares from people I used to chat with on the sidewalk. A few even crossed the street when they saw me coming. Then, a building inspector showed up unannounced. "We got an anonymous report your renovations were violating code," he said. They weren't. Everything was permitted and approved. Still, it took hours of my time and more paperwork just to clear it up. I started wondering how far she would go. I didn't have to wonder long. 2 weeks later, I came home from work and found the front door wide open. At first I thought I'd been robbed. But nothing was missing. In fact, it was worse. Someone had gone through every drawer, every cabinet, every closet. Files were pulled out, photo albums flipped through. My safe was intact, thank God, but it was obvious. Someone had been looking for something. The police came. I filed a report. I had a security system, but the cameras had been disabled. Someone knew what they were doing. Or someone had been in the house before and knew where everything was. I had a gut feeling it was her. But I couldn't prove it. The next day, I got a text from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. It was me, sitting in my kitchen, coffee in hand, looking out the window. The photo had been taken from outside, through the trees. I froze. My stomach dropped. Someone was watching me. I changed the locks again, upgraded the cameras, bought new curtains and kept them closed. I even got a dog, a big German shepherd from the local rescue. I named him Moose. He never left my side. But even with Moose, I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted in my own home. Then one night, I saw her. She was parked across the street in a silver Ford Fusion. I recognized it right away. I'd seen it in the driveway at every Thanksgiving, every 4th of July. I stepped outside, phone in hand, ready to take a photo. But the car peeled off before I could get close. I reported it. Again. Still, nothing stuck. No charges, no arrests. She was careful. She always had been. The real twist came the following month. I got a letter from the county. Apparently, a claim had been filed disputing the will that left the house to me. Margaret was arguing that the document was fraudulent, that my parents had been coerced, or worse, that I'd forged it. The will had been in place for 5 years before their death. Not a single question had ever come up. Until now. My lawyer called it harassment. I called it war. She wasn't just after the house anymore. She was after me. I don't know what she thought she'd gain. But I knew one thing, I was done playing defense. What she didn't know yet was that my dad, a quiet man who'd always stayed 10 steps ahead, had left me something else. Something that wasn't in the will. Something she would never expect. The thing my aunt didn't know was that my dad had been meticulous. He didn't trust easily, not even his own family. And especially not Margaret. She'd burned him too many times when they were younger, borrowing money she never returned, stirring drama just for attention. So when he updated the will, he also recorded a video. He made it on an old camcorder, saved it on a hard drive, and gave it to his lawyer with instructions to release it if anything ever came into question. When my lawyer handed me the USB drive and said, "Your dad was smart," I almost cried. We watched it together in his office. There was Dad, sitting at the dining room table I now used every morning. He looked tired but calm, voice clear. He laid it all out, how the house was meant for me, how he knew Margaret would try something, how she'd always had a hunger for what she didn't earn. He even listed a few of the stunts she'd pulled in the past, like the time she took out a loan using our grandma's Social Security without telling anyone. It was damning. My lawyer said the video alone wouldn't win everything in court, but paired with the official documents, it made a strong case. He said we were ahead now, but I didn't feel it. I still kept the curtains drawn. Moose still growled every night around 3 a.m. Then came the fake Facebook profiles. Dozens of them, all using variations of my name and photo. Some claimed I was running a scam. Others said I was evicting a poor elderly aunt who had nowhere else to go. They used real pictures, ones I'd posted years ago. I reported them all, but every time one went down, another popped up. Friends started messaging me, confused. One of them asked if I was running a GoFundMe under a different name. Someone had set up a fundraiser using my photo, claiming I needed help after being wrongfully evicted from my own house. They raised almost $800 before the site shut it down. I had to go to the police again. Cyber harassment. Identity fraud. Nothing moved fast enough. Margaret kept herself just behind the curtain, never directly involved, always using someone else's hands. Then I got a letter from a private investigator. He said he'd been hired to look into me, but after digging, realized the whole thing smelled rotten. He found out I was being followed. Not just once, but regularly. Same silver Ford Fusion, sometimes with different plates. He gave me photos, her parked near my work, near my gym, even at the dog park. He said, "She's not just trying to take the house. She's trying to ruin your life." I believed him. So I asked him to switch sides. He did. We started gathering everything. Surveillance footage, witness statements, screenshots, recordings of phone calls. It turns out, one of Margaret's friends she used to spread rumors, she hated Margaret just as much as I did. She started forwarding messages, DMs, even a voice memo where Margaret bragged about how easy it was to manipulate people into believing her version of things. The best part? That same friend told me something else. Margaret wasn't broke. She'd gotten a secret inheritance from a great-uncle on her dad's side. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to buy a place of her own. But she didn't want a house. She wanted this house. The one with the family name. The one my dad had poured his life into. Because to her, getting this house wasn't about shelter. It was about power. About control. And apparently, she was running out of time. The friend told me Margaret had also been dealing with debt collectors. Not because she was poor, but because she'd made some risky investments. Crypto, gambling, who knows. She needed a clean win, something she could sell fast if she had to. She was planning to sell my home if she ever got her hands on it. So while she was trying to ruin me, I was building a case against her. Then the worst thing happened. Someone broke into the house again. This time, I was home. Moose started barking like mad around 2:45 a.m. I jumped out of bed and grabbed the bat I kept beside my nightstand. I heard the back door creak. By the time I got downstairs, whoever it was had taken off, but not before smashing a lamp and knocking over my dad's old gun cabinet, empty, thankfully. I checked the cameras. Someone in a hoodie, face covered. Same build as before. Same shoes I'd seen in the PI's photos. The police came. Again. They took it seriously this time, probably because of all the previous reports. Still, no arrests. I reinforced every window. Upgraded my system again. But I knew then, Margaret wasn't going to stop. She wasn't afraid of the law. And she definitely wasn't afraid of me. She thought she could wear me down. Scare me into giving up. Or maybe she thought she'd push me far enough that I'd snap and make a mistake. She had no idea what I had planned. I kept everything close to the chest after that. No more updates online. No more reacting. I stopped talking about her to neighbors, even stopped trying to correct the rumors. I let her think she was winning. But behind the scenes, I was building something bigger. The private investigator helped me connect with a legal team that specialized in family fraud and elder abuse. Turns out, Margaret had been doing this sort of thing long before she targeted me. She'd tried to get control over our grandmother's finances years ago, claiming she was losing her memory. Back then, Grandma had no idea how close she came to losing everything. The paperwork was never finished, but it was enough to show a pattern. They also found bank records. Margaret had been shifting money between accounts, including some under fake names. She had a habit of making big purchases under someone else's info, then walking away when the bill came due. One of those names? Mine. She opened a credit card in my name months ago, ran it up to $6,000. She thought I wouldn't find out because she listed an old address for the billing. But I found it, and now I had all I needed. My lawyer filed a restraining order again, but this time we also filed criminal charges: fraud, identity theft, harassment, attempted conservatorship under false pretense. The police had enough now. Between the break-ins, the paper trail, the witness statements, the video from my dad, and her friend turning everything over, they had a case strong enough to move forward. The knock on her door came at 6 a.m. She was arrested wearing slippers and a bathrobe, yelling that it was all a mistake, that I was the one stealing from her. She told the cops I was possessed, that she was trying to save me. I watched the whole thing from my car, parked half a block away. I didn't blink. The trial was brutal. She denied everything. Said I forged the will, said the break-ins were just coincidences, said her friend was lying because she was jealous. But the evidence was stacked high. Every lie she told in court was shut down with facts, photos, bank statements, emails, recordings. Her face when the judge played my dad's video in open court? I'll never forget it. She sat frozen, eyes wide, mouth half open. That was the first time I ever saw her speechless. The judge didn't hold back. He called her behavior calculated, cruel, and predatory. Said she showed no remorse. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Not a slap on the wrist. Actual prison time. She tried to appeal. Lost that too. But here's where I have to admit something. I made a mistake too. After everything, after winning, I still couldn't let it go. I couldn't just move on. I found myself obsessing over her downfall, watching the trial recordings over and over. I even visited the prison once, just to see her behind the glass. I wanted to see regret in her eyes. I didn't. All I saw was hate. My lawyer warned me. Don't let her take more from you than she already has. But she already had. My peace. My sense of home. My time. So I made one final move. I sold the house. I couldn't breathe in it anymore. Every corner reminded me of the fight. Every room felt watched. The memories I had with my parents felt stained by everything that came after. I didn't tell anyone where I moved. New city, new number, no more ties. But before I left, I had one more thing delivered to Margaret in prison. A framed copy of the deed. Paid in full. Signed by my father. Stamped with the county seal. With a little note underneath that said, "You were never even close." She never wrote back. And that was the best silence of my life.